Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina. I am the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar Demystifying Single Touch Payroll, which will be presented by Pam Chilman, a long-standing MYOB certified consultant from AMC Training Centre on behalf of MYOB. Pam has just returned from the MYOB Partner Conference, both attending and being one of the speakers, and has also been acknowledged with a 25-year service award. So we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any questions during the session, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel, and Pam will answer them at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you have any technical issues, please also type it into the questions box and I'll be able to help you out through there as well. Please note that if you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience possible today. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you all within 2 business days after the webinar ends, along with the slides. That's all from me for now. I'll pass it over to Pam to get things started.
Great, thanks very much. It's great to be here and thanks for the opportunity to present on behalf of MYOB, and thanks Tina for that lovely introduction. So just checking in, just to make sure you can all hear me okay and that my volume is turned up okay. So let's begin. So I'm representing MYOB, talking about what's happening with single touch payroll and demystifying it a bit for you to try and make it a bit easier for this transition period that many of you will be in at the moment. So MYOB is working closely with the ATO to make sure that their products are all compliant, because as you know, MYOB has a range of products now for the small to medium range of businesses. So as MYOB gets more feedback, they certainly introduce a lot more of the enhancements to keep the software up to date and more seamlessly work with the ATO. So let's go through what we're going to cover in our session together today. We're going to talk about what is single touch payroll reporting, because we love acronyms. In fact, I'm based in ACT and we love acronyms. So STP is one that you'll see more and more of, single touch payroll or single touch payroll reporting. We'll talk about what you can do to get ready, and then we'll talk about what it looks like day to day up and running. So there is a bit of setup to start with, but once it's up and running, then what does it look like in your payroll processing, and to see whether anything will change for you. And then there'll be a little bit about final declaration and what happens at end of year, because there will be some changes in that space as well. We'll go through some slides and we'll also jump into the software as well to try and make it as easy for you to engage and understand what's happening with single touch payroll in relation to your MYOB. I guess the first thing to be aware of with the reporting is that it is about reporting, and single touch payroll has commenced for some from 1st of July 2018, and we'll talk about the timelines as well. We'll talk about what it means for employers as well as for employees, because there will be some changes that the employees will notice as well, and how to engage with your employees to make it, I guess, demystify it for them also. We'll jump into what to do to begin with getting ready with single touch payroll. So let's have a look at what some of these changes will mean to you and to your employees. Because I'm assuming today that probably many of you are on board today as payroll officers or CEOs or CFOs engaging on behalf of your employees. So let's talk about what happens within your software. So within your MYOB, your single touch payroll enabled version of your MYOB software, basically you'll process the payroll in a very similar way to what you do now. You'll do a pay run, and however you capture the data, that will still potentially be the same, but the pay run process should be the same as what you've experienced in the past with using your MYOB payroll functionality, and the employee at the end of that process will receive their pay slip as normal, so there's no change to that aspect, and hopefully they get paid electronically, or maybe they pay them by cash or check, so the payment methods don't necessarily change. But now with single touch payroll, once you're in the system, what will happen is that employees' year-to-date totals for the earnings, for the tax and for the super guarantee, that will all then be sent to the ATO via your single touch payroll enabled software. And that's a bit of a change because that information doesn't normally get communicated to the ATO until the end of the payroll year. And from an employer's perspective, the year-to-date totals that are being recorded will go through to the ATO, and that information will potentially be available through various online services for employees and employers, and even for some of the ATO different agencies that connect with the ATO as well. So this means when the employees have their information reported to the ATO, also in areas or portals or websites such as MyGov, where employees can see their information for other agencies, they can also, once you're in single touch payroll reporting, be able to see their year-to-date earnings as well. So that hasn't been information that they've had access to in the past. That's all been on their pay slips in the past. So each pay run, once that information is reported to the ATO, the employees will then have that transparency. The very latest information will be published in their MyGov accounts. What it also means for the employees is that payment summaries will become a thing of the past. Now, I know for many employees, they still call them group certificates. In fact, some of us still call them group certificates, or payment summaries is what the current term is. But in fact, they're going to become a thing of the past for payroll officers and for the employees as well. So it'll mean a bit of a change for them. Also, when this information is reported, each pay run, those totals will accumulate over the year. And when their final pay has been sent to the ATO with this new reporting process, the MyGov information will also then pre-fill the tax returns using these reported amounts. So the employee's tax agent will then have that information immediately available. So all this information is going to be updated through the year to various people, such as the employees, obviously all secure, and to the tax agents, as well as in the future to various agencies such as Centrelink and the other agencies that employees have had to report to in the past. So have a think about, as we're going through some of these slides, some of the changes that you, knowing your employees, might need to think about in communicating some of this change, because as we know, we tend not to like change for some of us, and employees as well might find it a little bit unsettling depending on your employees and I guess how well they connect with technology. So when do you need to start reporting is the next area that we're going to consider. For many, they've already been through the transition period because a headcount was required for knowing whether you needed to start reporting back on July 2018 or whether you can start reporting 1 July 2019. So it is a headcount. So for those who've got 20 or more employees and their headcount was as at 1 July, so if you had 20 or more heads in your business that you employed in the month of March, I love that date, 1st of April. In fact, I was engaging with the ATO when they were going through this discussion coming up to April, and I thought it was an interesting date they picked, April Fool's Day, which is an interesting concept, but in fact it's a serious topic of having to do your head count for the month of March. But ultimately everybody will be in. It's a matter of whether you had to start reporting 1 July this year that we're in now or 1 July next year. The headcount is a self-assessment. You don't actually need to notify the ATO of your employee numbers, although I expect the ATO will likely know who is meant to be starting 1 July 18 or not, because they have that information based on what you've reported to them in the past payroll years. Businesses can opt in earlier should they choose. In fact, our organisation, AMC Training Centre, we have less than 20 employees, and we decided to opt in early, I guess in part so that we knew how to help our clients transition smoothly, and we knew what that experience would be like going through that sign-up, that change and that reporting process. So you can opt in early, but be aware that if you do opt in early, even if you do have less than employees, that you can't opt out, that you are in. So if you start decide after this session today you want to opt in from your next pay run, that's great. But you can't actually opt out. You'll continue to go through that reporting process. But I guess one of the benefits to consider is that you won't have to do payment summaries for this coming year. And we'll talk about that transition process in a moment. So ultimately, everybody will be in. So this employee headcount, I guess, indicates whether you need to be fast tracking if you do have 20 or more employees and you haven't yet gone through this process, or whether you can wait until closer to that July 2019 period. So you can see in the table showing it does include all full-time, part-time, casual employees who were paid during the month of, in fact, any time during the month of March. So we actually had a lot of businesses in the catering or hospitality industry who have a lot of casuals who come and go. They pay different people each week, and they actually didn't realise, but they ended up having to start reporting 1 July because of the headcount during that period. There was some talk with the ATO about whether small organisations, those who only had 1 or 2 employees, would need to do this reporting process. But last I heard, there is no exclusion as far as smaller numbers of employees. So if you are a small organisation, a small not-for-profit on the line today, then you will still need to be considering when you start this reporting from 1 July 2019, unless you opt in a bit earlier. But of course the ATO understands that it is quite a change for some employers, and it does take time to get this all right. So in this first year of single touch payroll, the ATO does understand that errors can occur, and they are going to try and assist to make sure and resolve any issues and not incur any penalties in the first year of single touch payroll. So what does it actually mean for employers? What's the same and what is different? So what do we continue and what do we have to look at changing? So for employers, the same process of paying employees, the same process of still giving them pay slips, even though the year-to-date totals are being populated in the MYOB accounts and going to the ATO. You still have the same payment obligation. So the change with the reporting is only to do with reporting. It's not to do with changing any of the payment cycles. So you still have to pay your PAYG and your superannuation in the same time frames that you are obliged to, whether that's monthly or quarterly, according to the ATO guidelines. What has changed, though, once you are in single touch payroll reporting, is that you will no longer be required to produce payment summaries for your staff, because those totals will be provided to the ATO as part of those year-to-date amounts going through with this reporting process. Your employees may ask you for those payment summaries, and certainly MYOB has continued to provide, we don't have a time frame yet or when they'll stop doing payment summaries, but certainly in this year and looking into next year, you'll be able to should you choose to, but it's not something that you'll be required to do. But what we see with our clients is that fixing errors needs to be done more earlier or sooner than when you found those errors potentially at end of payroll year. So some clients would leave some of the fixing of errors with their payment summaries until we visited them to assist them, whereas now making those corrections is going to be more important, because when you think about it, the employees are going to get that information much quicker, and it's going to be reported to places like Centrelink and the ATO on a pay run by pay run time frame. So the other thing that's new as well is that the information is sent to the ATO with each pay run. And unlike payment summaries at the end of the year where we reported gross tax in its various forms, in other words, the earnings and tax amounts and some other fields, some additional fields are going to be reported that we didn't have to the ATO, which was the super guarantee. So the 9.5% or whatever the rate is that you're paying, along with reporting of the risk, which we did report on payment summaries. But the actual SGC, that 9.5% requirement, wasn't actually reported on the payment summaries in the past, and this is a total that will be reported to the ATO in single touch payroll reporting. And in the future, there'll be further enhancements to MYOB software and the onboarding process with staff in conjunction with the MyGov accounts to make it easier to onboard the employees as part of this reporting process. So watch this space, And it's a good reason to be keeping your software up to date so that you get a lot of these new features come through. But let's look at now from an employee's perspective to see what the employees will be noticing with the change. What can you tell your employees? Because they will have heard about single touch payroll at some point, or STP, as more and more information comes out in the media, particularly as we get closer to July 2019, when all businesses with one or more employees will need to report. So they'll be pleased to know that they get paid the same way, unless you change any of your internal processes, and they'll certainly continue to get their pay slips as they did in the past. But what we're finding with our clients is that they're starting to engage with their employees to start warming them up to the concept that, particularly around June, July of this year, that was actually your last payment summary that you would be receiving from the organisation. And not to be concerned, it's not because you're leaving the organisation, but it's the fact that the ATO, because of this new reporting requirement, means that you'll no longer be required to give them a payment summary or what they used to call a group certificate. So what will be new is for them to start thinking about MyGov accounts, because this is the place where they will be able to see and get access to those pay run information, such as the pay slips, totals, as well as the usual payment summary information that we would have emailed them or printed out for them in the past. So those year-to-date totals will then, in the future, be in the MyGov totals on the ATO website. So, do your employees have a MyGov account? Have you got a MyGov account? Do you know what it's like to have a MyGov account? Maybe that's the first engagement with the employees, to start the discussion with them, to suggest to them that they might like to start getting a MyGov account. It's been interesting we've run a number of single touch payroll workshops, and it's been interesting to find that probably on average, I'd say about half of the people attending the workshops and the webinars we've delivered, is half of them would have MyGov accounts and half don't. So it means a lot of people are still yet to sign up and get used to using this process. There is a document on the ATO's website called What to Tell Employees, and there's also one about employers as well. I can send that to Connecting Up so that you can have access to that, or you can access it from the ATO's website, or we also have one on our website about how to engage with your employees. And it might be something to start thinking about, or including that one-page document with the pay slips or a link to start engaging with your employees in this particular area. Because that information is going to be used, that you use to report, unlike the payment summaries where you'd send it to them and hand them out to them, they will then have that information populated in their MyGov accounts. So one of the changes to get used to. Now, as I said there, from a compliance point of view, there's going to be no penalties in the first 12 months, and the ATO is going to be working with businesses and all range of organisations in the first grace period of the 12 months. It's not a holiday period, it's a grace period to get things in place so that everyone is all reporting from the 1st of July 2019. Or if you are on deck today and realising that you should have been reporting, maybe that you've had some notification, so it's great that you're here to learn how you can start reporting with this important process so that there is more transparency to make sure all businesses are on an even playing field and fulfilling their tax and super obligations. Probably one of the areas that we've found that businesses have needed to do is to think about doing a bit of a health check on payroll, because maybe you've inherited an MYOB file, maybe you're new to the organisation, or you've just set up payroll or someone set up for you. One of the things to be doing now, if you're not required to report until next year, is to be looking at if all your employee details are up to date, to ensuring the pay calculations are correct. Although I'd have to say probably your employees will let you know if you are not paying them correctly. But to be cleaning up and making sure your payroll data is all complete, up to date and clean, because it's the data from within MYOB, the contacts, like the card files, and the payroll categories information that's going to be going through as part of this reporting process. It's also an opportunity to review your actual processes that you carry out as to whether you're working live with MYOB, and by live I mean recording your pays, creating an ABA file and sending that off to the bank so that you're touching your payroll information once, not double handling, so that you have a nice smooth workflow. No one really wants to double handle information because it takes time and there's a potential for errors if you are touching your data more than once. You may have different methods of paying your staff, cash or cheque or electronic or a mixture. Maybe it's a good time now to start looking at automating some of these processes to make this workflow nice and smooth so that when you're doing this reporting, you know that it is picking up all the correct data and not having to add extra work as part of your processes. As I said, there's no changes to PAYG payment cycles or superannuation, but what it is bringing out as we're having conversations with some businesses is that it's identifying that some businesses might have been dragging the chain and not really keeping up to date on their superannuation obligations. I know that's hard to believe for some, for those of us who are doing the right thing, but there are businesses out there that we are seeing that, for whatever reason, have not been fulfilling their superannuation obligations. So now, with more transparency of this data with the ATO and the data matching with the superannuation funds with the ATO data, there will be more and more communications for businesses that are not fulfilling their obligations, which I'm sure you would agree would be a good thing so that everyone is paying the same amount of taxes and superannuation as per the legislative requirements. But clean up your payroll data would be my first tip for you, and make cards inactive, make sure those employees' information is all up to date, and then you can start getting ready for the reporting process. And I mention this, and whilst it sounds fairly obvious, some organisations I find are keeping their information, some of their payroll information outside of MYOB. Information such as superannuation, tax file numbers or other information, they don't actually update it until the end of the payroll year. Or maybe they don't put superannuation details in there because they're using the Small Business Clearinghouse and they store all the details in the Small Business Clearinghouse. So I believe it's time to consider using your MYOB payroll features to fully complete all those card records and details so it's all in the one central spot. So let's now talk about how we can get ready as part of this transition, because there is some steps to go through depending on where you are with using MYOB and which version you're using. What fields we need to update in the cards and also in the payroll categories, and also about connecting with the ATO, nominating who has the authority to do this reporting. So the first of the 4 key points that we just talked about is to ensure that you have single touch payroll enabled software. So is your MYOB version single touch payroll enabled? So when 2018.2 was released, so MYOB's Account Right I'm talking about at the moment, Account Right 2018.2 was released early on around May of 2018 to get ready for single touch payroll, and they had some readiness checks in there, and it was allowing organisations to start doing part of the setup. And then in June, the single touch payroll connection service was turned on to connect with the ATO, where you nominated MYOB as your software provider, allowing businesses and various organisations to run the report to do the single touch payroll reporting. So I was quite impressed. MYOB did actually have this connection process really early on to allow businesses to be compliant from day one, and it's been a nice, seamless process for most businesses. We're now in version 2018.3 as being the latest version of Account Right, and that could be Account Right Plus or Account Right Premier. And that has had some further refining, obviously some further enhancements throughout the product, allowing you to continue to do your single touch payroll reporting. But some businesses we've found as part of this transition were still using Account Right Classic version. We call it the Classic version, version 19, or maybe even earlier versions, version 18, version 17 or earlier. Version 19, though, would have been the latest classic version if you were maintaining your tax table updates and compliance updates back in June. So MYOB have been supporting two ranges of products, the classic version, Account Right Plus, Account Right Premier, as well as the 2018 range, or 2018.2 or 0.3 range of Account Right, which is actually the single touch payroll enabled version. So everybody will need to upgrade to 2018 of the latest version, because Account Right Classic version will not be updated to include single touch payroll reporting. And that's because it's written using older technology, and that's why 2018 or its earlier versions were released, to make use of the latest technology to be able to connect using standard business reporting and the right connectivity with the ATO. So one of your first steps from today may be to go back and have a look and consider what version you're using, whether it's the classic version, version 19, and whether you need to look at upgrading, because you can upgrade, you don't have to start fresh. You can go through an upgrade process to go from the classic version to version 2018.3 being the latest. And MYOB have also made other announcements as well. Certainly, having just recently attended the MYOB conference, it's certainly public knowledge that version 19 will not continue to be updated after September 2019. And we've always known that version 19 will not continue to be updated because it is using latest technology. One of the misunderstandings about 2018 is that there has been an assumption for some businesses that you had to work online. And I know many of you today may be in remote areas, or your internet connection may not be that great. So do be aware that your file with MYOB's latest version can still be on the desktop, still can be a networked edition if you don't want to be online, or for whatever reasons. It may be internet connectivity is poor. You will need to connect via the internet to do the reporting at the payroll reporting process, but you could continue to still be on the desktop or network on the latest version of version 2018. So just wanted to make that clear, because I know some organisations resisted going to 2018 because of thinking they had to be online. And if anybody needs any clarification around that, either contact MYOB. I'll put some contact details up later on, as well as my own if you are looking to engage someone to assist you with this transition process. So if you don't already have a transition plan to upgrade, then certainly that's something to put on your checklist or your action list from today. MYOB Essentials is the other small business product, and being a browser-based solution where you don't need to install any software, the Essentials product is updated automatically for you. That's the nice thing of being on a browser-based solution. It was updated back in May, and it continues to be updated as the enhancements come out, but you can be using MYOB Essentials, reporting using single touch payroll as we speak today. There may be some online today who have not been able to upgrade for a couple of reasons. And one of those reasons might have been you are on the MYOB Account Edge, the Mac platform, or you may have been on version 19 and been using the multi-currency, the foreign currency capabilities, or using the multi-stock location or negative inventory, so the advanced inventory features in the Premier or the Enterprise version. Or you may be using some add-ons or empowered payments, and that has prevented you, or the software has prevented you from going through that upgrade that I just talked about. So in this particular case, you can be eligible for a deferral. And the ATO has granted MYOB users under these situations to have a deferral granted until May 2019. But that's only if you are using those features mentioned and shown on the screen. Otherwise, start working out your plan to be on 2018. So, your data. Let's look at your data. Because your data is all within your cards and your payroll categories, in order to do this reporting, we need to make sure there is that connectivity of the fit of your information and that fit for when that data gets sent across to the ATO. All software providers had to make these changes, and so there has had to be a bit of a setup as part of this transition. So certainly it's good if you're thinking about this transition process for July next year, and particularly if you've got a lot of payroll categories, it's great that you can start this process today. Information such as your company details, validating and verifying that that information is correct, which you would expect it would be, but there's a validation tool that's been provided by MYOB to do some data checking. Also with the employee details as well. So there is a tool called Payroll Reporting, which does do this validation, which is a nice tool to go through checking and advising you and presenting you with the fields that need fixing. Information such as your company details to make sure they're all complete, but in particular your employee information. This data is going to be passed through as part of this reporting process. Name, address details, phone numbers, tax file numbers, email addresses, date of birth, as well as start date. So these fields must be filled in, and if they're not, you will get, in the validation check, it will show you that there is missing information. Let's have a look at the second area to have to be checked as well, and I will show you this payroll reporting tool in one moment. But just to cover off on the second key area, so the contact information for your employees' cards is particularly important to be up to date. But the second key area is the payroll categories. Now, for anybody who has been doing payment summaries in the past, you'd be quite familiar with what I've got on the screen here now, showing you down the left-hand side the fields on the payment summaries. And on the right-hand side would be your list of categories that you would use to match up the fields on the payment summaries on the left. That's what we've been doing up until now, prior to single touch payroll reporting. So that area is actually going to become redundant. There is actually a new area and new fields that you may have noticed. For those of you who have already upgraded and are on the latest version, you've probably already discovered that there are payroll categories with an extra field on the right-hand side. So this area here is your payroll categories list. So I'm sure those who are processing payroll would be familiar with your wages, your super, and all your other category groups. We've had a new category field, or an ATO reporting category field, added on the right-hand side in the last couple of updates in MYOB Account Right. So what you will need to do as part of your setup, and this is a one-off process, you will need to go through and assign those reporting categories to the new reporting categories to the ATO. Now, they're very similar to what we had in the past, but let's have a look at some of those changes. On the left-hand side of this table, and it's going to look a bit cluttered to start with, but let me chunk it down for you. On the left-hand side, you have your ATO payment summary fields that you would have used in the past for producing the payment summaries in that payment summary area of MYOB. On the right-hand side is the new list of STP reporting categories, and you'll find they're very similar. So gross payments, same option to allocate them to in gross payments. With allowances, in the past we'd had an allowance section. We've also got a few other definitions of allowances to nominate when you're setting up your payroll categories. Lump sum payments, very similar to what we had in the past. Workplace giving, slightly different changes of names but the same context, as well as our deductions, as well as our CDEP, as well as other fields that you may have used, like exempt foreign income, but your total tax withheld is your PAYG withholding. So on the right-hand side is the list of categories that you'll pick when you're nominating and setting up your payroll categories. Let me just switch into MYOB, and hopefully my technology works for me on my new Surface Pro today. Hopefully you should now be able to see my Clearwater sample company file showing version 2018. And if you're ever not sure about which version you're using with MYOB, just jump up to your help screen up the top, go down to About MYOB Account Right, and you'll be able to see what version you're using and also what build or version number you're using as well. So I'm on 2018.3. So if it doesn't look the same, if yours has a bit of a different look, you may actually be on the classic version, and that may be something to address as part of your transition. So those payroll categories that I was talking about have this new reporting category option on the right. So whenever you set up a new category or with a list that you already have, you will need to actually set them up and assign them in this area here with that list that I just showed you to indicate where they go in what we used to do with the payment summaries. This process will need to be done for every single ATO, every single category that you have, even the ones that are redundant and that you're no longer using. So that's been a bit of a challenge for some clients who've had a long list of payroll categories. Don't shoot the messenger here. You will need to actually assign them all, just in case they end up being used in the future. And don't forget to go through and make sure you do all the other categories as well in each of these tabs that are relevant here. There is a new tool that I mentioned called Payroll Reporting. And the good thing is, once you've gone through and checked or set up your payroll categories to nominate where they go when they report to the ATO, this lovely tool that MYOB have added called Payroll Reporting. It's not actually the reporting feature, which is what I thought it was originally, but if I go into Payroll Reporting, it's actually the validation tool. It's where I go to check for payroll details all being set up. So it's probably one of the first areas I go into. So it can check to see whether my employee cards all have valid details in there. And I can see already my employee Alan Long doesn't have a valid tax file number in here. I can see that I didn't finish allocating an ATO reporting category as well over on the right-hand side. So it's a great tool that MYOB have added, so that should be included as part of your process. Because superannuation guarantee is also to be reported as well. So one of the things that we didn't report in the past on the payment summaries is the super guarantee. So don't forget to also set that up as well. One of the things that often comes up when we're working with our not-for-profit clients is that many do salary sacrificing. So before single touch payroll, you would need to make sure you picked the gross payments and the salary sacrificed category when you did your payment summaries to ensure that you reported the gross taxable amount, the reduced amount, so that the payment summaries were correct. With single touch payroll, one of the things that's confusing many of our not-for-profit clients was the fact that you didn't actually need to do this. The salary sacrifice deductions that were set up in those payroll categories areas we just touched on before, if they're set up as pre-tax deductions, they will, because MYOB have set it up in this manner, those categories will automatically reduce the gross taxable payments amount. So be assured that if you set your salary sacrifice deductions amounts up correctly as pre-tax, then you will they will report correctly through to the ATO. Commonly asked question with a lot of the not-for-profits. So once you've gone through that payroll reporting screen that I just went into, and you have completed and you've fixed up Alan Long's tax file number back on his employee card, then you should get a nice green tick box. We like the green ticks to indicate that all our company information, all our employee details, as well as our payroll categories all meet the ATO reporting requirements. In other words, the fields are all in the right format to be able to report through to the ATO. One more thing that we have to do as a one-off task is that we do need to nominate who is the person that's going to be authorised to report to the ATO. In the past, when you issued your payment summaries, you'd do a declaration on the payment summary and you'd put the person's name in to say who was issuing those payment summaries. Whereas now, every time you do a pay run, so whether that's weekly or fortnightly or monthly, or for some who pay irregularly, if it's daily, hopefully not that often, but each time you do a pay run, you'll need to make this declaration and do this report to the ATO, so you'll nominate who your authoriser is. In order to do that, you'll need to have your business number details, so your ABN handy, and you'll also need to know your MYOB email and password, and with your contact details as well. So you will need to contact the ATO either electronically and nominate who is going to be the authorised person to send through the information. You need to notify the ATO by providing them a unique software ID, which is available when you go through the process. And I'll just switch back and indicate it's all part of this payroll reporting process in here in MYOB, where you go through and connect to the ATO. As point 2, it'll step you through a little wizard. Once you have that information of who's going to be the authoriser, you can either ring the ATO directly on this number shown on the screen, particularly for those who don't have an Oz key or not set up with the ATO or the BAS or any of those portals, or you can connect via your MYOB using that payroll reporting tool using the Access Manager process, which will step you through in that payroll reporting section. Just be aware that if you do go on to the ATO and do that process and you ring that phone number, you will need to have several points of contact because they will ask you personally for your tax file number. So do ensure you have a lot of your personal details on hand if you don't keep them easily accessible. In that wizard, once you've completed that process and you connect and you say, yes, I've finished that process now, you will then have indicated to the ATO to expect that reporting to come from MYOB as being your nominated software provider. So that's all part of your initial setup. Once you've completed that process, the ATO will then expect you to be doing the reporting. So what's it going to look like day to day, up and running, when you are reporting? So we've covered off on the setup. Now let's have a look at what your normal payday will look like. It should look the same unless you start refining some of your processes if they're not as automated as they could be. But the good news is you'll process your pay as normal, edit your pay period dates, check the amounts for each of the employees, and click on that record button that you're all familiar with. As in the past, you'd email your pay slips and transfer the funds, but at the record pays step, you will have a new declaration process. And that declaration process will be where the information from the payroll will automatically go through to the ATO. So many I know were expecting to upload a file like an ABA file or send something to the ATO. That record process and the declaration screen that comes up, which is it's simply what is your name and do you authorise MYOB to send the information to the ATO. It's one screen that comes up. Once you declare that that is true and correct, that is the end of the process. If you aren't online, if your file is local, there will also be a sign-in that you'll need to do with your my.myob credentials as well. So there may be an extra step depending on whether you're storing your file locally or whether you're storing it online. MYOB does acknowledge that there are times where maybe you didn't quite finish the process or you weren't quite ready to do your declaration. So there is the ability to save and close should you wish to not do that reporting for whatever reason at that point in time. Next time you go in and do your payroll, the year-to-date totals will be updated. And I guess that's one of the key messages to come out of today, is that it will be year-to-date totals that continue to be reported. It's not actually the weekly or the fortnightly pay amounts, it's actually the year-to-date totals that continue to be reported. So if you do make adjustments of any sort in between a pay run, next time you do your full pay run, all the year-to-date totals will be updated. If you are happening to be using MYOB Essentials, the browser-based solution, it looks a little bit different, but the concept is the same, where you'll click on Save and then you'll get your declaration. So your software is the source of the truth. Your year-to-date figures are continuing to be reported to the ATO. So if you report $1,000 in total for all your employees, tax of $200 and super of $95, when you do your next pay run, and if it was exactly the same, those year-to-date totals will continue to be reported. Remembering it's year-to-date that continues to go through, not the actual pay week 1, pay week 2, or pay week 3. So it does highlight the importance of making any changes throughout the year. In fact, you are required by the ATO. They have indicated, advised that business does need to report within 14 days or in the next pay event of any corrections that need to be made. And that should be done by making reversals or deleting or making those corrections so that those updated year-to-date totals can be corrected. So unlike in the past for some, and not everybody, for some, obviously they're correcting them as they go because you want your pay slips to be correct. But if you are making those corrections, be aware that once you do your next pay run, those updated totals will go through. So it's just a couple more screenshots just going through. Being aware that if you delete or reverse an entry, those year-to-date totals don't go through. It's not until you actually report in your next pay run, those totals go through as year-to-date. So year-to-date, it's a new concept to get used to. We're not actually sending them through a report. We're not actually sending them through a file. It's all going through directly connecting to the ATO. MYOB is going to continue to provide updates as we get further into single touch payroll reporting and further refining is done, such as with eligible termination payments. If you have set up an ETP category, you'll get an extra box down the bottom right indicating what the ET benefit is. So you'll notice some enhancements continue to be made, which this one has been as part of the ETP requirement for reporting, as well as some of the other areas that are continuing to be developed as we get or as MYOB gets feedback on some of the reporting and changes that need to be made to make it easier for us to work with payroll. So what does happen at end of year? Well, at end of year, we need to somehow trigger the final declaration. So there will be an end of year declaration process, which it won't be payment summaries, but you will need to actually record your final pay to trigger to say that there is finality in this actual end of year process. So it's a bit of a mix of the old and the new. And of course, we will need to report things like reportable FBT amounts. So there are steps that we need to go through, particularly in our sector, of having to report information that only gets reported normally at the end of the payroll year. So some of these areas are still in development, and that will be certainly ready in plenty of time for the payment summaries for those who are already in with single touch payroll this year. So end of year, we haven't yet seen that end of year process. There is a lot of development happening in the background with MYOB, so be assured that you will be able to do adjustments, you'll be able to do amendments, all those functions that we need to do as payroll officers at the end of the year. But it will be quite a change of mindset, getting used to the concept of only reporting to the ATO at end of year, whereas now we're actually reporting to the ATO every single pay run. It's quite a change of mindset, isn't it? The same process that we've had in the past of closing off payroll year end will be the same for those using Account Right. You will still download and install your compliance update. If you're using Essentials, that happens automatically for you. And if there's tax table updates, they continue to need to happen. And at this stage, we still have a close off of the payroll year. But I guess we've freed up a little bit because we're potentially having our year-to-date totals go through at the end of the year. So interesting times, and as MYOB says, it's just the beginning of single touch payroll, and MYOB will continue to develop their product and keep you up to date in the various channels. There is on the screen you can actually see help.myob.com is a great way of keeping in touch with MYOB as per their website, and also at the bottom the ato.gov.au single touch payroll area for the actual information from the ATO. If you are here today and you realise you're on an old version and maybe you haven't subscribed for a while to your software, or maybe you've joined an organisation that doesn't have current MYOB software, there is an email address for you to connect via the connecting up at myob.com.au email. And the nice thing is that MYOB have partnered with Connecting Up to offer a 30% discount for those who are Connecting Up members. So it's a great reason to look at getting your subscription back on track if you haven't or the organisation hasn't continued to subscribe. Single touch payroll is on its way for those who are less than 20 employees, so it's not a matter of if you have to report, it's a matter of when. So hopefully today that I've helped you think about some of the things that you'll need to do to get ready, or to fast track if you realise you should have been in. Some of the tasks that you need to do. For us and our clients, carrying out a payroll health check has been one of the most important tasks to do to get ready. But if you feel confident with your payroll all being clean, I guess, for want of a better word, then maybe you'd like to opt in to single touch payroll reporting and free yourself up from the payment summaries at the end of the year. Hopefully that's given you a bit of taste of single touch payroll. Hopefully it's demystified it a little bit for you. I know a lot of our clients were quite nervous about the process, and at the end of the sessions, hopefully they've felt a little, as you have, I hope, felt a little bit demystified with the whole process. Seeing, first of all, I guess, that the MYOB software, the MYOB team and the developers have all put a lot of effort into helping you get ready, to help you report, and making it as a painless process to keep up to date with the legislation with the ATO. I've put in on the screen that email address, connectingup@myob.com.au, if you are wanting to engage and looking at getting that special Connecting Up offer of resubscribing, but hopefully also reminded you about some of the steps of keeping your payroll up to date. And thank you for allowing me to present, Tina. It's been great to have you here, and I'm happy to answer any questions if any come up.
Great, thank you. I'd just like to let everyone know that we do have Alice Tucker online from MYOB as well, if you have any questions in relation to any of the software. So we do have some questions that I will go through now. We have one from Heather asking, what about Account Edge in regards to being STP enabled?
So Account Edge, we're just waiting for notification from MYOB in relation to that. Alice might be able to assist further, but there is a deferral in place for the Mac version of MYOB. Alice, did you want to add anything further to that?
Yeah, no, that's right, Pam. So the Account Edge has a deferral until the 31st of May next year, at which point we should then have a solution available for clients using that Mac software, or potentially a longer deferral if it's required.
Okay, we have one from Megan. Are you able to run the verification without opting into STP, just so you know you are all ready to go for the 1st of July 2019?
Yeah, great question. Yes, you can, and I'd encourage you to do that. I've just switched my screen back again. So I'm in the Clearwater file, and I've done absolutely that. And I encourage you to go into payroll reporting, go through that first step, check your payroll details before you actually do the connection process if you're not ready to connect. So yes, absolutely. It's a great way of being ready.
Okay. Okay, we've got one from Helen. What payroll category for the ATO do we use for unused holiday pay, brackets termination, fringe benefits? Also, do we have to record maternity payments refunded through Centrelink?
Gosh, there's a few questions there. So in your payroll categories, you will need to go in and make sure you set them up in the different ways to define where they go into the groupings. So without having seen your file and how you're using them, it would be similar to or the same concept of what you were doing with your payment summaries. So if it went into gross before, those categories have not changed. It's just you need to define them in this area. So if you reported in the past those categories in gross payments, you'd put them in gross payments. If you reported them as allowances before, you'd set them in allowances. If they were unused annual leave, it depends on whether they were lump sum payments as in termination or redundancy payments or ETP. So it's probably something you'd need to either, we can assist you with it, or talk to MYOB, or if you have a certified consultant, there's a team of certified consultants listed on MYOB's website that can also engage with you more specifically to go through your categories. But it does mean, if you're familiar with doing the payment summary process, it'll be similar, same sort of concept as what you have done in the past.
Okay, it looks like we haven't got any other questions that have come through. Was there anything that you wanted to add, Pam?
No, just I guess those questions that came up about the getting ready in advance is a really good thing to do, because I know there's a lot of people who are putting their head in the sand. I guess well done on being on this session today, because I think there's going to be a big surge of demand to get support and help ready for 1st of July next year. So I think the sooner people can get themselves ready, the better. And don't be afraid to opt in, I guess, is the other thing I would suggest. Like, do your upgrades now, get ready now, start linking your payroll categories and getting your data clean, because I think it's going to be very busy leading up to 1 July 2019. And opt in now and you can demystify the process for yourself. And also you won't have to worry about payment summaries at the end of the year as well, so you can save yourself some time.
Okay, we've actually got a few more questions come through if you don't mind. Vicky has asked, do inactive employee card details need to be checked?
Inactive cards, as in employees that are no longer active. So in the earlier versions of MYOB, you did have to validate all the details of all the employees' cards, but I don't believe, unless it comes up in that payroll reporting section, you don't have to worry about it. That's why I would use that payroll reporting feature, because that's going through and doing some validation with the ATO of the data. If the employees don't come up in there, you won't have to worry about their data.
And Patricia has asked, what happens if you start now? What about previous pays that you've already done this financial year?
Yeah, great question. So if you opt in now, so we're here in September, nearly October, that's absolutely fine, because if I process a payroll now for gross wages of $10,000 for this pay run, but I've been paying my staff since July and there's an extra $50,000 of gross wages, it will accumulate those totals and it will report and send the $60,000, the accumulated totals year to date based on MYOB's pay runs that you've done in the past. So as long as you've put the pay runs in MYOB, those year-to-date totals will go through. So you can actually opt in now. That's why with our clients, we're recommending they get started sooner rather than later, and that's absolutely fine because year-to-date totals will go through.
Okay. Helen asked, do we have to report fringe benefits, salary packaging, or is it not reportable till the end of the year?
So the reportable FBT amounts that you in the past put on the payment summaries, you would continue to do so as an entered amount in a field that we're yet to see. We're yet to see that final end of year declaration process. So you'll continue to do that process the same as what you did in the past. But as I said, we haven't yet seen that process. It'll be that grossed up value that you key in.
Okay, so that's all. Thanks very much, Pam, for presenting today. And thank you everyone else for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from this presentation and that all of your questions have been answered. If you do have any questions that come to mind later or any feedback about the webinar, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we'll answer those questions offline. You can also contact Pam directly via the information on your screen. Don't forget that the recording will be available within 2 business days and a link will be sent to you along with the slides, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you everyone for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you.